Good morning and afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our panel today on frameworks to support a secure digital landscape. My name is Dr. Bienvenu Soglo, and I am the Director, Government Affairs Africa and EMEA CTO Liaison at Intel Corporation. It is an honor for me to moderate this panel that is themed Frameworks to Support a Secure Digital Landscape, whereby the panelists will discuss how technology and policy can help strengthen cybersecurity frameworks. Before I introduce each panelist to give their opening remarks, first, I would like to provide some context from my perspective. As we all know, rapid technology changes are now fueling a fourth industrial revolution, which is fundamentally altering the way we live, the way we work, and the way we relate to one another. The COVID-19 pandemic has further accelerated this transformation by several years in just a few months. Therefore, with COVID and the new normal, digital transformation is key to supporting economic activity and well-being during the crisis, as well as in sustaining economic recovery and spur innovation. Cybersecurity is a critical element to consider while going through our digital transformation journey, as data breaches are, for example, up 41% in the first quarter of 2020 alone. This is according to a McAfee Labs threat report. The ever-increasing scale, scope, and sophistication of cybersecurity attacks and global supply chains is requiring government and industry to evolve their approaches to combating these threats, including better cross-sector coordination. Government and industry are concerned that the increasing organization and sophistication of cybersecurity adversaries is leading to more frequent and severe cybersecurity incidents. With the recent high-profile ransomware attack on Colonial Pipeline, for example, more companies than ever before have started to think about the potentially devastating consequences of cyber attacks and how to best protect themselves from these attacks. Cybersecurity frameworks are often a starting point as organizations start or look at revamping the cybersecurity programs. Navigating the cybersecurity framework landscape can be challenging. With that said, let me call on stage our first panelist, Charlotte Branfield, Global Operational Resilience Program Director from Citi, to give her opening remarks. Charlotte, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Bienvenu, and it's a great pleasure to be here. As Dr. Bienvenu has outlined, and I believe the rest of this panel discussion will explore, enhancing how we think about public policy and our frameworks, both within the private sector and within the public sector, for approaching a greater and more secure digital ecosystem is absolutely vital. There are a great number of opportunities. If we think about things in terms of value, greater security in our frameworks and approaches and greater similarity in the language, so how we talk about cybersecurity, operational resilience, and so on, that really is an enabler for greater innovation. It means firms, or indeed public sector, can be quicker in taking things to market with less friction, overhead costs, and errors, because security becomes built in to the very core of design principles, the why we want to produce something, what consumers or other stakeholders want to use it for, and how we think about adapting and evolving it as time goes on. That in turn helps with financial inclusion. It helps produce greater jobs for the economy, and not just within a country, but actually across border. As we've just heard some statistics around e-commerce and data flows and trade flows, greater security in our digital ecosystem is absolutely vital. What I would comment on in my opening remarks is we have to sometimes look at what I would call the more boring aspects, or some of you may not find it as boring. I find these things quite interesting, but we've got to think about the risk. Why are we focusing on security? Why are we spending time, resource, and energy and effort on it? And for us to really think about frameworks that are effective and really add value to how we think about digital ecosystems within a firm, within a country, or within a continent, we have to really understand what it is we're measuring. Whether you are a bank like Citigroup, or you are a startup, fintech, or a central bank, Ministry of Finance entity, or so on, what we have to understand is that today, these entities already choose to manage cyber or digital risk. We can use antivirus protection or choose not to use antivirus protection. The board discuss it or the board don't. But what we lack is an effective way of discussing the cyber risk or the digital risk. Traditionally, we have thought of risk in terms of financial assets. So capital reserves is one, a rating is another. But in today's digital economy, increasingly the assets at risk are intangible. They are trust, access to data, reputation, and privacy. We have to understand that our way of approaching risk and a way of measuring risk that uses financial assets today is no longer synonymous with reality. So we have to really take a step back and define what it is we want to protect and understand how we go about defining the value at risk. Once we've identified what we want to protect, so our consumers' privacy, our firm's reputation, our ability to access data through open banking and APIs, then we can think about the types of security that we need and the level of investment we need, whether that's in education and skills or that's in actual technology. So I will leave my opening remarks there because I know we're going to return back to many of these themes later on in the panel. Dr. Bienvenue, back to you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte, for your opening remarks. And yes, we need to define what is it that we want to protect. And so, well, thank you for your insight. Let me call on stage our next speaker, Mr. Wasim Youssef, Chief Technology Officer and Systems Engineering Leader for Northeast and Western Africa at Palo Alto Networks, to give his introductory remarks. Wasim,
thank you very much.
Thank
you very much, Dr. Benvi. I'm very happy and glad as well to be here, and I echo what Charlie just mentioned about the risk and how to measure the risk and how to capitalize on the digital transformation journey. So when you look at it, at the end of the day, with the digital transformation, we always look for countries and nations to be more prosperous, right? And to the economy to be better, and for the people to have a better living. And the digital transformation, when you look at it, is a very good opportunity for all of us to do more business and to do more interactions and to live better at the end of the day. But we also need to look at how to secure this journey, which is very important. We typically see across the region that the cybersecurity part is not really being considered as a vital pillar in the digital transformation journey. And this will always, and I've seen this in many I would say projects across the continent and other continents as well. We'll all see that though it's digital transformation is a very good opportunity, but when you don't really consider cybersecurity as an important pillar to consider while deploying the projects, it might end up the other way around. People would lose trust in the systems, either financial systems or governmental systems. And if you correctly mentioned, Doctor, in the opening with the pandemic, we've seen many countries evolving and using more of digital services like online banking instead of just going to the bank and deposit or actually withdraw money. Lots of people, they started to have to do the wire transfer more frequent, but initially they lacked a little bit of trust in the system, right? And the trust is what is because of the historical experiences. The more trust you have in the systems, this means that you're going to use the systems more and more and more, and this is going to lead to a success at the end of the day, right? So in the initially, we found all of us actually a little bit confused or not really want to use this wire transfers. And then time after time after time, you gain that trust. Now, even when the banks, they allow you to withdraw or actually deposit more amounts of money, you don't really need to do that anymore, right? You just want to do the wire transfer because you're used to it. It's very easy. It makes your life better and easier. So that the nice thing about digital transformation, that when you get used to it, it will really change your life. And changing the life not only for the user, but also for the nation, right? You can bring more business to your nation, to your country, by launching more new services and digital services for other countries worldwide. And the more services or trusted services you deliver, the more business you are about to bring to your people. But again, without focusing on the cybersecurity as a trusted, as an important pillar here in the digital transformation journey, you lose the trust and you lose the credibility, and you're not actually going forward, you're actually going backward. Again, I would stop here for my opening remark, and I'm sure that we're going to have lots more discussion around this interesting topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wasim, for your perspective and insight. Yes, we need to build trust in the system, and as you have that, people will get used to that, use the system a little bit more. Thank you very much. Next, I would like to call on stage Tas. She said I should call her Tas. That is easier. She's a cybersecurity officer at First National Bank, South Africa. So I invite her to give her perspective on how technology and policy can help strengthen cybersecurity frameworks. Tas, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bunu, and thank you very much to everybody else. I really appreciate the time to be part of this panelist discussion. I have to say, Charlotte, your opening statement absolutely set the tone and the scene, I think, of some of the challenges that definitely are faced within, most countries in the world. In South Africa, and that's where I will speak of, is the challenges we have stem further to priority in economic standpoint of our country, right? When we're a country that is struggling to feed our nation, a country that is struggling to provide jobs to our nation, cybersecurity is one of the challenges that we would love to raise to higher in the mark. Very similar to the reasons you had spoken about earlier, is if we're able to properly translate the risk now and do that user education and awareness and build the transformation capabilities now, we won't get ourselves into a worse state in the future, right? It's about getting those foundation and principles up and running. And I very much like what you said around the common taxonomy between organizations. I think very similarly, every organization is solving for its own cybersecurity risks and concerns best suited to itself. But how do we as a nation start to operate together, speak the same languages, make sure that our industry bodies are not just serving their own interests, but that of the nation as well? And how do we bring together that people, process, and tech, but more importantly, structure a program that can provide the user education and awareness, which is something that is quite lacking in our industry, or rather in our country. I think when we have basic education level concerns, cybersecurity is one of them, but it's important for people like us. It's how do we make it important to every single individual that's within a country? And that's some of the things that I think would be really important for us to focus on as a nation going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tess. Yes, indeed, we need to get nations to speak the same language, and education and awareness are very critical. Thank you very much for your insight and perspective. Next, I would like to call on stage our next speaker, Segun Okuneye, Divisional CEO Business at IPNX Nigeria Limited, to give his opening remarks. Mr. Segun, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Benvenue, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone, and thanks for having me. To speak to this subject, I think it's important to mention that digital transformation is driving the adoption of the cloud. Of course, I'm talking about the public cloud and also the private cloud. But to speak more to this subject, we're looking at the concept of the public cloud. it is very, very clear, and this has actually been proven by the pandemic, that one, the nature of how we work is completely different from what used to be before. We now see more of distributed workforce. We have people having work done on the move. You have people having work done, of course, with mobile devices. Now, this is creating some huge level of exposures, right, which is actually driving huge level of security vulnerabilities. It is important to actually mention at this stage that the subject of discussion, which is framework to support a secure digital framework, is very, very crucial. And why do I say this? Now, the existence of the digital landscape is hugely dependent on the successful implementation of policies, frameworks, guidelines, procedures, and reforms, which is very, very crucial. And it's also important to mention here that the growing impacts, the economy largely depends on digital transformation as it is now. And it's important to mention that the successful implementation of frameworks is actually a responsibility that cuts across three different groups of people. So of course, I'll talk about individuals, we'll talk about the organizations, and also talk about governments. Now, what is the main challenge here that we see? There are diverse and what I call the fragmented frameworks, which are either localized to organizations, or localized to states, or localized to companies, or countries rather. Now, it is very, very important that there is synergy and collaboration and coalition of these different frameworks by different organizations, countries, and even policymakers at the international level. So it is important to understand that, one, having framework is very, very crucial, because this is the only means through which you can maintain the existence of digital framework as it is now. So it's important to mention here that, one, we are highly exposed to security vulnerabilities because of the new normal, which is the distributed workforce. Now, you think about people having work from home, you have people doing what I call the home to field. And based on that, these exposures are real. And it's important that we begin to look at the frameworks and how they can be successfully implemented. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your insight and opening remark. Yes, there are frameworks, but they are fragmented, right? We need to look at the implementation of the framework and so on. Thank you very much for your insight. Next, I would like to call our last speaker, Mr. Adam Sedgwick, Senior IT Policy Advisor at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, to provide his perspective and opening remarks. Adam, you have the floor.
Thanks, and thanks for having me today. I'm the only rep here from government, which always makes me a little nervous, but I thought I'd talk a little bit about the approach we take in the US and some of the frameworks we have that we've been working on at Nist. So that Nist, people know, Nist is a part of the US Department of Commerce. We're not a standards body, even though we have standards in our name. We're the president's principal advisor on standards policy pertaining to competitiveness and innovation. And we do a lot of work with standards bodies. And we do a lot of research around measurement, which is such a huge challenge in this space, as we've talked about a little bit. One of the ways that the US has approached some of these challenges is by leveraging international standards bodies, which we've talked about a little bit. Because standards are usually developed by industry for industry purposes, we have found in the US that leveraging those provides for more innovation, it keeps up with markets, and it allows us to focus on more pressing policy objectives rather than trying to sort of compete with the private sector as they're developing those new technologies. So we can make meaningful contributions, such as in our work with cryptography and supply chain and a lot of other areas. But this open, transparent working relationship with industry allows us to develop frameworks with strong standards underneath them that can support our policy objectives, while also not taking advantage of general technological trends. So that gives us kind of an advantage sometimes with some particular frameworks that we've developed. Often they come to look at these challenges of fragmentation. So our big one is we have a framework for cybersecurity that was developed for critical infrastructure. And we began with a very open conversation with stakeholders in 2013, asking them, there are existing standards, there are existing guidelines, there are existing best practices. Why aren't they being used more widely throughout industry? And how do we support your use of them while focus on other challenges where we need to develop standards or best practices? And we found a couple of things. One thing was the increased use of technology, this digital transformation that we've been talking about, means that we need to have a more holistic conversation within the organization, bringing together business leaders and the more technical folks. And often those conversations are very siloed. And then between sectors, you sort of had similar fragmentation and challenges with taxonomy. Because this technology did not exist before, people have their own cultures, their own histories, and often they developed their own cybersecurity solutions before they had these dependencies that exist today. So coming up with that common language so that someone in the telecommunications sector can talk to someone in the energy sector, can talk to someone in the financial sector, is also something that we've thought quite a bit about, and our framework was intended to address. Then thinking more broadly, those things have helped us have conversations internationally. Things that are good for cybersecurity tend also to be good for trade and vice versa. We have global markets. These products need to be interoperable. Standards play a big role in that. And I think when we look at the policy level and between governments, to the greater degree we have that common taxonomy, it helps policymakers have those conversations as well. So those things are all leveraging frameworks to help us reduce complexity. And that's the approach that we sort of recommend more generally. And I'll leave it at that. Look forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Adam, for your opening remarks. Just some key words from what you said. You're looking at leveraging international standard bodies, right? And also having open, transparent relationship with the industry. Other important aspect is the challenge you face in terms of fragmentation of the taxonomy, right? That is used looking at fostering international conversation, right? Because, this is important in terms of, trade, reduce complexity and so on. And so, now I'd like to, call on stage all the panelists. I have some few questions that I would like, to get your perspective on. The time that we'll wait to see if we get from, the distinguished participant to this panel to send the question through. And so the first question that I have, and perhaps I will ask Shagun to take this one on, which is, what is the greatest challenge in cybersecurity in your company, or in your country, or in Africa in general?
All right, thank you so much for this. I will say that there are challenges, and just like you rightly mentioned, this challenge actually cuts across companies, countries, and even individuals. The very first thing that I will mention here is about cloud vulnerabilities. With the growing need for distributed workforce, adoption of cloud-based services, there's a greater level of exposure more than ever before. And of course, as businesses establish their own clouds environments, they are saddled with more responsibility to secure their data resources and network resources through the implementation of security policies. Now, because of the dynamic, the level of changes that actually occurs, of course, looking at what's been driven by the data transformation, there's this challenge of maintaining or having what they call consistency in implementing those security policies. So that is a key challenge that we see. And if these policies are not properly implemented, of course, the loopholes, the risk level increases, and there's a high level of exposure to cybercrime. One thing that is also, the other thing I also want to mention here is about the exposure that we have through mobile and portable devices. Now, people are on the move working, and they have their mobile phones, their smart devices, and also their, what's it called, portable devices. Now, while they have a plan to get things done in terms of productivity, there's this level of exposure because of the different mobile apps that we have on their systems or on their devices. And there's this temptation to just want to download things. And this actually creates some level of exposure because some of those apps are malicious. So that is one other area where there's a major challenge at large. It's important to mention that there's a major risk that needs to be consciously or continually evaluated to mitigate against these challenges. One other key area is about data privacy protection, which is also key. Now, of course, there are several efforts by governments, organizations, governments at both international level and national level, to bring about policies on how organizations, of course, particularly people that actually gather information about end users, on how they collect, store, and process user information, which is very, very key. And you begin to see different policies that are actually being developed here. But of course, like I mentioned earlier on, these policies appear to be fragmented, and there's a need to have these things all, there's a level of collaboration to make sure there's a level of consistency across borders. Now, of course, in Nigeria, for example, you begin to talk about the NDPR, which is the Nigerian Data Privacy Regulation, and also the General Data Privacy Regulation, which is more external. Now, this begins to pose challenges because how do you merge these policies together? Now, this is one key thing that is a major challenge that needs to be addressed. It is very, very important that companies understand how to adopt these policies within the confines of the organization, how to adopt these policies within the confines of the nation as a country, and how to interact with other countries at the international level. So these are key challenges that is actually we're being faced here in Nigeria, and of course, I want to believe also in other African countries. I did mention earlier on about fragmented and complex regulations. Now, there's a need for collaboration, there's a need for coalition to help manage this challenge so that there can be ease of navigation through this increasing and complex systems of regulations and rules. I did mention earlier about the GDPR, also mentioned about the NDPR. Of course, there's this the California Consumer Privacy Act, and many, many other ones. So how to get the best value from these policies, get them seamlessly implemented, is something that's very, very crucial, and is a major challenge that needs to be tackled at this particular end of the divide. It's also important to mention that whilst policies are required to help protect, it's also important to make it as simple as possible so that we don't develop huge complexities, so that we don't have issues implementing these policies. This certainly requires cooperation between policymakers and much more. Just finally to mention, it's very, very important that the challenges of identifying and containing breaches as quickly and as soon as possible is very, very crucial for us as a nation. Also, how do we get solutions to reducing the opportunities for these attacks? How do we create a culture of awareness, which is also very, very key, is a major challenge that needs continuous focus. Avoiding loss of functionality is very, very crucial. There's this challenge of when you have a security breach, business continuity seems to be an issue. But how do we create the guidelines, the policies, the procedures to make sure there's business continuity, even if there's an attack? So that support is also very, very important for us. Then just to mention finally, is about complying with the cybersecurity legislation. We don't just want to have legislation, but more importantly, we want legislation that actually creates a disincentive for those that may be involved in cybercrime. There should be clear laws and rules to have some level of what I call the punishments for those that are involved in this particular acts. So I would just say that it's, in summary, that it is very, very crucial to have this framework because, like I mentioned earlier on, the sustainability of the digital landscape is highly dependent on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Segun, for your insight and for your perspective on this question. Yes, harmonization, very important, make it simple. And also, there needs to have clear law and rules for the punishment of those who are, making those attacks. Quickly, I'd like to go to Charlotte, just to put a quick question to her, just to say, if you look globally, how are companies and government working together to improve cybersecurity? And where can it be improved? Charlotte, over to you.
I think Adam and Segun outlined some key areas. So obviously standards is one. Do we have a common definition? I often joke that we have some fundamental issues with cyber because we've got cybersecurity, one word hyphenated or two words. And if we can't even get cybersecurity right, how can we get anything else defined? I won't touch more on the standards because I think Adam has covered that well. But from some of the work that we've seen, and we ran a couple of years ago before COVID, a multi-country cyber resilience exercise with 5 countries in Africa. And Nigeria was one of them, so was South Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, and Ghana. And when we think about what I would call enabling frameworks towards the response and recovery end of the spectrum, whereas some of what Adam and Segun talked about was at the design phase, it's really quite simple things such as defined roles and responsibilities for the different players in the market. So depending on the market, what's the role of the central bank versus Ministry of Finance versus the bank regulator versus the communications and ICT regulator? Who is going to get all the key participants on a call? So if you need to have your CEOs and chief risk officers of your banks and your telecoms or energy firms, who is going to be responsible for calling them all and getting them on a crisis call? Is there such a thing as is it a Zoom call? Does everyone have the details? So defined roles and escalations. At what point do we get everyone on a call? Other key elements that I see, we see this a bit in the UK, the National Cyber Centre has an Industry 100 programme where they take on secondment practitioners from private sector of every sector, so banking, energy, health, and they second them into the government cyber centre, similar to, it's called FSARC, so the Financial Services, effectively risk centre in the US. And that's getting everyone to talk about risk and the impact, the consequence of risk materialising in the same way. That's good practice because what it does is it draws a clear line between something happening and a risk crystallising and then the consequence. So an example might be, let's say that there's a third party connection. So that could be a supplier, it could be another bank, it could be a payments platform. Hypothetically, if they had malware or we had intelligence or heard they might have malware, and we wanted to cut the connection between our firms, that's me acting on intelligence and the risk that malware might come into my system. But the real risk that I have to manage is the consequence of disconnecting from an entity, particularly if that's a payments platform. What impact does that have on the liquidity of the system? If every bank were to disconnect from a payments platform, for example, or from the same third party, that puts that organisation in jeopardy, or it puts the market in jeopardy. So understanding what risk is, how it crystallises, and actions is important. So having what I might call a risk registry that's maintained perhaps at the country level is really important. And that goes to Adam and Segun's point about a common language. And I would, last but not least, playbooks. I know it's an oft spoken about term. It's like information sharing. Everyone mentions it. But it's really important that there are response protocols that everyone exercises together. And by exercising, that could be a 1 hour, almost like a multiple choice quiz. X has malware, pick one of the options, which option would you choose? To a full-blown day in they call it a tabletop exercise or a war room where people simulate and they role play. It sounds a lot. These things can be very simple, but they're very important to do collectively, because what we've uncovered within City, and certainly when we exercise with clients and others, we all think that we would do the same thing, but then actually everyone does something slightly different. And what's important is if we do different things, we know what others will do, or if we decide that it's not appropriate to do different things and we actually all need to do the same action, we need to understand and come to collective agreement with what that action is. So having a sector playbook that the relevant regulator or public sector authority owns and coordinates the private sector is really important. And last but not least, the open question is it's around assurance. One of the key areas where private and public sector entities need to come together and work is developing a framework around assurance. If we think about that third party I gave as an example that might have malware, the question that we would all ask ourselves is, it's very easy to disconnect, but when would we reconnect with that entity? Who is going to tell us that it's safe to connect with them? Is that the public sector? Is it the regulator? And these things in the world of cyber and forensics, it could take months. So depending on how important that entity is, we've also got to ask ourselves the question back to risk. Are we comfortable with a certain period of time, for example, 3 months, before we can reconnect with that entity? So I would leave that with a burning question of we need ideas around assurance, and that's the next step in public-private partnership.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Yes, we need ideas around assurance. We need framework around assurance. We need to have a risk registry at the country level. Thank you very much for your perspective on this question. As we continue, this conversation, we're looking forward to get questions from the audience. So please send your question through. Before that, Wasim, just a question for you. Why cybersecurity is vital for digital transformation? Do you have any lessons learned from that perspective?
Yes, thank you for the question. So as mentioned previously, again, the trust with the digital transformation is key. And we had many examples and lessons just to shed some light on few things. Think about digital transformation, not just for maybe even a banking or a financial institution. Think about something that's strategic for a country. Think about something like online exams or e-exams for the whole nation, right? And this is a pure digital platform. And what would happen if students go to the exams and they face problems, regardless of connectivity or the app, or at the end of the day, they have an issue with that, right? What would be the consequences? Not only massive consequences of the students not be able to take the exams and the whole country would collapse into this, but the level of trust between the people and even between the leadership within the country, not for the app, not the trust in the leadership, not in the trust in the apps, not the trust in the infrastructure, not the trust on anything, is going to be sort of a trust between even the leadership and the people themselves, right? So these are the level of consequences that you can think of whenever you go into digital transformation, specifically for the government sectors. When you launch such services for a nation, you really need to ensure that it's really cyber resilient, right? And it would deliver what exactly it's needed for. It's another example for this. Think about registrations, any type of business registrations, like foreign companies that they want to invest in your country. They have your portals. They want to access your portals and do business and start to register a new company and reach out to local suppliers in order to do more business. And then again, what about when they face such bad experience when they access those portals? What exactly the expectations? The expectations that those guys most probably they're going to look at other company or other countries to invest there, right? So again, the impact is really huge, and that's why when you think about a huge impact like this, and you think about the sponsorship that the cybersecurity is getting within any digital transformation, you're going to find mainly the sponsorship is going to the digital transformation, not really sponsorship, I mean, from the leaders level, not to the cybersecurity, but only to the digital transformation. So this is one part of it. We really, for such important projects, we really need sponsorship, because sponsorship is going to shed more light about the need of the cybersecurity and the risk associated with it. And accordingly, this is very important. Another also important point that we have also seen that even when you have sponsorship and all the leaders in the management, or they're looking in investing in cybersecurity along with the digital transformation, another limiting factor is that the scarcity of resources in cybersecurity. And this is something in general, you find it in the globe, right? But also in Africa, we're even having, I would say, a worse situation. The scarcity of resources is really a problem here. And with the limited frameworks and procedures, you might end up every entity based on the experience of people that they have, they are actually building their own sort of cybersecurity solution to complement the digital transformation, the journey that they have, right? And this is the second pillar that we really need to look into it, which is we really need to educate more and more and more. Africa is full of resources with lots of youth, and we have great generations coming. We really need to educate more and more. The more education we have in the cybersecurity, automatically we'll have more sponsorship, automatically we'll have better cyber resiliency for all of those critical projects. So again, these are just my 2 cents regarding the lessons learned, because these are things that I have experienced myself across many countries within our lovely region.
Great, thank you, Wasim. Just quickly, digital transformation need sponsorship, you need trust, we need cybersecurity resilience, but we also need capacity building, right, in this subject. Thank you so much. And the next question, I would like to address this one to Tess, if she has a few more minutes. And the question is about, what do you want individuals or companies or government to know or to act upon that will improve cybersecurity?
Look, I'm not convinced that there is too much more that I can add that's very different to what most of the panelists have said. And to be very honest, I think I'm just reiterating. But if there's one thing, if I could choose one thing and one thing in particular, I would have to say I would want people to understand the importance of their identity. I think if there would be a basic level understanding of every single individual from a school level, from a basic child growing up, we're taught basic principles. Don't talk to strangers, look across the road, don't just talk to people randomly, hold mommy's hand. It's that basic level of education that needs to be brought into our systems now in this new digital world. Kids are growing up with tablets and iPads, and education systems, especially with work from home, has now had to transform to being online. It's translating the same basic risks that we grew up with into this new transformational world. And it starts for me with making sure every person, every company, every individual, every nation understands the importance of their identity. I think once you understand it, nobody willingly wants to offer themselves up to a dangerous situation. And understanding the importance of your identity means you'll understand how to protect and secure it, why you wouldn't want to give it away, why you are very cautious around your privacy, how you will interact with companies, how companies will interact with you, because we respect and understand and want to make sure that we deliver on the privacy of your identity. And obviously, as Charlotte had mentioned, it's around changing our risk measurements as well. Everything is not just tangible assets. I think that's probably just my sort of closing statement to collaborate sort of what everybody else has already spoken about today.
Great, thank you so much, you brought a new perspective, which is that people should understand their identity, right? And we need, basic level of education and so on. So I think this is really great. Thank you very much for your perspective on this question. And the next question that I have, and this is for everyone, but I would like to start with Adam, which is, what opportunities do you see for companies or US and African partnership in supporting cybersecurity? For example, we could look at the perspective for a continental cybersecurity framework, or some academic program related to cybersecurity, or capacity building on cybersecurity. What is your take, Adam, on which kind of partnership we could see?
Sure, it's a great question, and I think there's any number of ways we could take that. So, building off, I think where Wasim ended, I think capacity building, and particularly education and workforce, is a very good place to perhaps start from. Some might think that this is not a challenge in the United States. It's absolutely a challenge in the United States. We have more positions than we have people to fill our jobs in cybersecurity today. And some of my colleagues with the Department of Commerce have done some analysis. And there's actually a website called CyberSeek, where you can see different regions and where there are vacancies and where those positions need to be filled. And to really address those vacancies, you need to have a holistic approach. You need to look down to awareness, so people even know that there are jobs that are out there. And then education, and you can't start education at the college and university level. You need to start education at K through 12. And you need to really think about the types of professionals you need to have. It's not one type of professional, it's many different types of professionals to fill out. And I think when we're looking at those, you also can't take a siloed approach. You can't think about geographic regions. These are people in one country are supporting customers in another country. So I think that's a good place to look at, and we would be happy to support those discussions. But I think more broadly, I think all of the work that we do at Nist, and I know this is true for a lot of other places, is open. We welcome international participation. We welcome people to our workshops. We welcome people to provide comments. We welcome people to participate. And I think there's a lot of other venues out there that can start breaking apart these challenges and figuring out, as African countries are considering the best ways that they have to address these problems, what resources have already been created that industry participants are already aware of. So instead of reinventing the wheel, they can look to these existing international standards, these existing approaches that were developed openly and transparently so everyone knows what's underneath them. And how do you begin the conversation there instead of with a blank sheet of paper? And that's something we'd be very interested in helping to support.
Thank you very much, Adam. Yeah, great perspective. Look at existing international standards, capacity building opportunities, and so on. So thank you very much. Any other panelists want to provide his or her perspective on this question in terms of opportunities for US companies and African companies, or the US and African partnership in supporting cybersecurity?
Okay, just permit me to just add a few points to what Madam had mentioned earlier on. I think this actually gives us opportunity for cross-border collaboration, industry level awareness, which is also very crucial. But more importantly, is about skills transfer and knowledge developments, capacity building and support, very, very crucial. Just to add, this, of course, is an era where information sharing on cyber security trends is very, very crucial. Awareness is crucial, industry level awareness, individual awareness, very, very crucial. And cross-organizational awareness is also very, very important at this particular point. It's also key to mention that opportunities also does exist for solution development, right? There are cyber crimes, there are cyber security issues, but solutions are also necessary also to combat this and also to minimize the risk. So we begin to think about solutions, right, to monitor, to detect and control, prevent and mitigate these attacks is also very, very crucial. So just to round up, research and development is also very, very key. I think with the growing trends of this challenge, continuous research into cyber crimes, cybersecurity issues is very, very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Segun, for your insight. One additional aspect is that research and development is very key, especially for this topic. Wasim, anything to add from your perspective?
Yeah. One thing might be that as everyone has covered most of the points here, maybe another topic very quickly, just to touch base on. When you look again at digital transformation, everyone is using their mobile tablets to access online resources and online services. You always need to think about the connectivity as well, right? So and since in Africa, we don't really have the best connectivity and coverage, we also will be definitely looking at enablers. And the biggest enabler coming on our way is the 5G, right? So this is maybe something that we didn't touch base at all. To think about 5G gives the opportunity for everyone to connect, but also give a very big challenge for the security as well, for the cybersecurity. Now thinking about the IoT and all the devices are going to be connected, not talking about the user accessing the mobile, accessing online service, we're talking about your TV at home, your electricity meter, your water meter, and basic essential stuff for living. All of this is going to be connected. Looking at the cybersecurity, again, for the 5G and specifically for the 5G, but for the connectivity, in order to give this great experience, this is one of the very, very important pillars that we really need to look at, considering the transmission and the network coverage previously coming from the 2G, where we didn't have much of what we call the IP network and less of cybersecurity attacks. Now looking at everything has a connectivity and can access everything, anything with the home automation and with the IoT. This is another very important pillar as well. Comes really need to be discussed and give it its attention as well, part of this discussion. But I thought to mention it just for a couple of minutes.
Great, thank you very much, Wasim. A great, very important point. Connectivity, 5G and broadband connectivity. There is a need to have high quality broadband, right, in order to ensure that all the discussion we're having now actually got to fruition. And so increasing the broadband penetration on the African continent will be crucial. As we're getting closer to the end of this panel, I would like to ask each one of you to give, in a minute or so, to give their closing remarks. Maybe we'll start with you, Wasim, as you have the mic.
Thank you. Thank you. So again, my final points, just to recap, cybersecurity is really important, is really vital for everything coming on our digital way of life, right? So anything coming digital, cybersecurity had to be hand in hand. And this, in order to be properly thought of, needs sponsorship. And we really need a higher level sponsorship, not just sponsorship at the engineering level. And we really need lots of education. We are having lots of scarcity and resources for the cybersecurity. And this is something we really need as all nations globally, that needs to be maybe in the curriculums of the students, basic stuff about cybersecurity. It doesn't have to be advanced, like talking about the identity and the stuff that mentioned previously. Also thinking about all the coming era of the new connectivity, cybersecurity with the digital transformation, and new connectivity has to become a de facto part of the discussion. Actually, if we didn't take care of the cybersecurity, we don't want to learn it the hard way, I would say it.
Great point, Wasim. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Perhaps Segun, some closing remarks, 1 minute.
Thank you for that. I think it's important to mention that digital landscape is very, very crucial to economic development, and more importantly, also improvement of lifestyle. That's one key thing to actually mention here. But also to mention that framework is very, very crucial to support and promote healthy competition, very, very key. Protect consumers and operators, promote innovation, and also create an enabling environment, very, very important. And last but not the least is about the question of use of the public cloud for security purposes. It's important to mention that, one, there's a shared responsibility that's actually required. When you're talking about the public cloud, you're talking about making use of third-party infrastructure as a service. Then in that particular point, we know that there are responsibilities that actually belongs to the end users themselves, which is about the security in the cloud and the concept of security of the cloud by the provider. So it's important to understand that when it comes to making use of the public cloud for security purposes, it's all about the shared responsibility. Thank you.
Right, public cloud, shared responsibility. Thank you very much, Segun, for your closing remark. Adam, just, 1 minute, your closing remarks.
I'll keep it very quick so we don't go over time. I'll agree with sort of this positive framing and positive messaging, because I think it's the right way to think about it. Often with cybersecurity, we start with the threats and we talk about all the potential challenges, but I think instead taking the perspective of, if you have the proper level of cybersecurity and privacy protections, all of the things you can enable, the economic development, the digital transformation. I think frameworks are one good ways to do that. And I think it doesn't take the decisions away from an organization or a country. It simply enables them to make informed decisions based on this work that is already out there. And thank you again for having me.
Great, thank you very much, Adam. And I would like to thank the panelists for a very insightful session and panel. Thank you so much. Before we go, we now have about 30 minutes on the workshop agenda for the guests to visit the exhibition in the exhibit hall and network with other attendees in the meeting hub. But please return at 11:45, which is 17:45, if I'll say Johannesburg time where I am here, for the next two concurrent panels that are so relevant, obviously, to the discussion we just have now. The first one will be about 5G and Open RAN technologies, and the other will discuss about technologies to support healthcare systems. So please return at 17:45 to the agenda section and choose which section you want to participate. Thank you again for the panelists, and see you in the hall. Bye-bye.
Thank you.